Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the thrilling, often terrifying, reality of being a medieval messenger. Imagine, if you will, the flickering firelight of a drafty castle hall, the scent of damp straw and wood smoke clinging to the air. You stand before a lord, perhaps a king, his eyes heavy with expectation, or maybe a glint of cold fury. He hands you a tightly rolled parchment, sealed with his signet ring, its contents a matter of life, death, or kingdom-wide war. You nod, a lump forming in your throat, knowing that this isn't some leisurely jaunt through picturesque meadows. Oh no, you're not just delivering a letter. You're delivering your very existence into the maw of medieval peril. You'll be crossing vast, untamed lands, facing dangers that make your morning commute look like a trip to a spa. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling chatty, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the weight of that message, a physical and metaphorical burden, as you step out into the biting chill of the pre-dawn. Your horse, a sturdy but often temperamental beast, shifts beneath you, snorting plumes of frosty breath. Your leather satchel, worn and familiar, holds not just the dispatch, but also the meager provisions for a journey whose end is far from certain. In an age before instant communication, before even decent roads, you are the internet, the telephone, and the postal service all rolled into one weary, often poorly paid, human package. Your success, or failure, can literally turn the tide of history. Think about that for a second. The fate of entire duchies, the lives of thousands, hinge on your ability to not get eaten by wolves, or robbed by bandits, or simply catch a fatal chill from sleeping rough. The concept of a professional messenger service, while rudimentary, was absolutely vital. You weren't just some random bloke with a note. You were a recognized, albeit low-ranking, part of the feudal system. Lords, kings, even powerful bishops relied on individuals like you to carry their commands, negotiate treaties, and even spread propaganda. For instance, a mainstream historical fact is that King Edward I of England, known as Longshanks, significantly expanded and formalized the royal messenger service in the late 13th century, understanding its strategic importance for governing his vast, often rebellious, territories. His messengers would often carry a royal pass, or symbol, like a small, carved lion or a particular badge, meant to grant them safe passage, though its effectiveness varied wildly depending on who you encountered. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval messengers were rumored to have secret pockets sewn into their clothing, or even hollowed-out heels in their boots, to hide particularly sensitive messages. Imagine the awkward moment if your boots started squishing on a rainy day, revealing a rolled-up declaration of war. You'd be less secret agent and more sloshy spy. The sheer ingenuity, born of desperation, to protect these dispatches is quite remarkable. Historians still argue whether these extreme measures were commonplace or reserved for only the most perilous missions, but the whispers persist. You, with your basic leather and wool, probably just stuffed it deep in your satchel and prayed. As you ride, the chill seeps into your bones. The horizon lightens to a pale gray, hinting at a new day that promises more miles, more risks, and more solitude. Your mind races, anticipating the next challenge. Will the ford be swollen after yesterday's rain? Is that distant smoke a friendly hearth or a bandit camp? Every shadow seems to hold a thread, every sound a potential ambush. Your senses are heightened, a constant low hum of anxiety your steady companion. You pull your cloak tighter, adjust your grip on the reins, and urge your horse onward. The message must get through. The road, if you can even call it that, is less a defined path and more a suggestion of where previous travelers might have trod. You feel every jarring stone, every rut, every unexpected dip that threatens to unseat you. Mud squelches under your horse's hooves, or perhaps the ground is frozen solid, unforgiving beneath its iron shoes. There's no asphalt, no convenient signposts, just the vast, indifferent landscape stretching out before you. You're a tiny speck in a world that doesn't care much for your urgent mission. The terrain itself is an adversary. One moment you're trudging through a dense, primeval forest, where the branches overhead weave a skeletal canopy, barely letting in the weak sunlight. The next, you're ascending a steep, rocky pass, your horse breathing heavily, its muscles straining. You squint, trying to discern the path ahead, but all you see are shadows and the promise of a long, arduous climb. Remember those modern hiking trails with their neatly marked paths and handy benches? Forget about it. This is raw nature, untamed and indifferent to your plight. One wrong step, one stumble, and you could send yourself and your horse tumbling down a ravine. And believe me, medieval healthcare wasn't exactly known for its speedy recovery times from a broken leg. You'd be lucky if a passing peasant offered you some questionable herbs and a prayer, let alone a proper splint. Weather, too, is a fickle and often brutal master. You might start your day under a deceptively clear sky, only for a sudden, torrential downpour to erupt, turning the ground into a treacherous bog. Your clothes, your satchel, everything becomes sodden and heavy, chafing against your skin. Or perhaps a biting wind whips up, carrying sleet or snow, stinging your face and chilling you to the bone. You pull your cloak tighter, uselessly, as the cold seeps into your joints, making every movement a painful effort. You can almost hear your horse sighing in exasperation as another gust tries to rip your hood from your head. Just another day at the office, you might mutter, if you had the breath for it. Then there are the rivers. No sturdy bridges spanning every waterway. Sometimes there's a rickety wooden bridge, hopefully still intact, creaking ominously under your weight. More often, you're forced to find a ford, a shallow crossing point, if you're lucky. If not, it's a risky swim for both you and your horse, praying the current isn't too strong, that you don't lose your footing, and most importantly, that your precious dispatch stays dry. Imagine trying to explain to your lord that his declaration of war against the Duke of wherever is now just an illegible, pulpy mess because you misjudged a river crossing. That conversation probably wouldn't end well for you. A mainstream historical fact here is that medieval roads were largely remnants of Roman infrastructure, often poorly maintained, or merely tracks created by generations of foot traffic and livestock. Beyond major routes, they were practically non-existent, making travel incredibly slow and dangerous. The average speed of a mounted messenger, even on relatively good stretches, was only about 20 to 30 miles a day, which meant even short distances could take days. And here's a quirky detail. Travelers often relied on landmarks like ancient trees, peculiarly shaped rocks, or even isolated shrines to navigate, rather than maps, which were rare and often inaccurate. You'd probably have a local guide for the trickier sections, someone who knew every twist and turn, every potential bog, and every safe resting place. But even they weren't infallible. Historians still argue whether the lack of standardized road signs was more a consequence of low literacy rates, or simply the prevailing belief that local knowledge was always superior to written instructions. Either way, you're mostly relying on your wits and the occasional whispered direction from a peasant you bribe with a copper coin. As dusk begins to fall, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, you start scanning for a place to shelter. A distant flickering light might be an inn, or a lonely farmstead, or perhaps just wishful thinking. The wind picks up again, rustling through the bare branches, a mournful sound that seems to echo your own growing weariness. You pull the hood of your cloak further over your head, urging your horse forward. The elements are always testing you, pushing you to your limits, and they're just the beginning of your worries. As if the relentless terrain and the capricious weather weren't enough, there's a more immediate, more predatory threat lurking in the shadows: bandits and brigands. These aren't your charming, swashbuckling heroes of legend, folks. These are desperate, often brutal individuals who see you, a lone traveler, as nothing more than a walking purse or a source of valuable goods. They're the reason your hand instinctively hovers near the hilt of your trusty, if somewhat rusty, dagger. You ride along, perhaps humming a tuneless medieval ditty to ward off the silence, when suddenly, a rustle in the undergrowth. A shadow detaches itself from the trees, then another, and another. Before you can even react, you're surrounded. Faces, often masked or grimed with dirt, leer at you. Their weapons, crude but effective, glint menacingly in the dim light. This isn't a polite request for directions. It's an ambush, pure and simple. Your heart hammers against your ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the forest. Do you fight? Do you try to flee? Or do you simply surrender and pray they're only interested in your coins and not your life? Or worse, your precious message? These aren't organized armies. They're opportunistic thugs, often disgruntled former soldiers, desperate peasants, or outlaws who've found a lucrative, if short-lived, career in highway robbery. They know the isolated stretches of road, the choke points in mountain passes, the dense forests perfect for concealment. They operate in small, agile groups, striking quickly and disappearing just as fast. For them, a messenger isn't just a target for plunder. You might carry news, a ransom, or even orders that, if intercepted, could be sold to a rival lord. You're a walking, talking intelligence report. A mainstream historical fact is that banditry was a pervasive problem throughout the medieval period, particularly in areas with weak central authority or during times of war and famine. Travel between towns and cities was inherently risky, and merchants, pilgrims, and especially messengers were frequent targets. Lords often had to maintain their own armed retinues specifically to protect their routes and ensure safe passage for their envoys. If you were a royal messenger, you might have had some protection, but for a local lord's errand runner, you were often on your own. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval travelers would carry a small, easily accessible purse with a few coins, meant to be quickly thrown to bandits as a distraction or a tax to encourage them to leave you alone, while their real valuables were hidden deeper in their clothing. It was a kind of bait money strategy. Imagine practicing that throw, hoping your aim was true under pressure. Historians still argue whether this practice was genuinely effective or just a desperate gamble in a dire situation. You probably don't have enough spare coin for such niceties, though. Your entire wealth might be the few shillings in your main pouch. The encounter is quick, brutal. They might demand your horse, your boots, even the clothes off your back. And always, they'll want to know what you're carrying. You have to be careful. Reveal the message, and it might be intercepted, copied, or destroyed. Resist, and you could be left for dead, stripped bare in the wilderness. You try to keep your face impassive, your voice steady, hoping to appear as poor and uninteresting as possible. Perhaps you claim to be a simple friar or a traveling peddler with only worthless trinkets. You probably even try to make a light joke, something like, "Sorry, lads, the Lord just pays me in good intentions and bad puns," hoping to diffuse the tension, though it's more likely to earn you a cuff to the ear. As they finally ride off, or perhaps walk away, leaving you shaken but hopefully alive, you take a moment to collect yourself. Your hands might still be trembling, your breath ragged. You check for injuries, for missing items. Your horse, if it wasn't stolen, might be spooked, shying at every shadow. The close call leaves an icy dread in your gut. You face down the elements, but human malice is a different beast entirely. You urge your horse forward, your eyes constantly scanning the tree line, every rustle of leaves sending a fresh jolt of adrenaline through you. The journey continues, but now with an even keener sense of vulnerability. Having narrowly escaped the two-legged predators, you now face the four-legged, or even winged, variety. Wild beasts were not some exotic curiosity in medieval times. They were a very real and present danger, especially in the vast, untamed wilderness that lay between settlements. You're not just worried about a grumpy badger. You're thinking about wolves, bears, and even wild boars. These encounters aren't picturesque wildlife sightings for your social media feed. They're desperate fights for survival. As you push deeper into the ancient forests, the silence often feels heavier, broken only by the creak of your saddle and the rustle of leaves underfoot. Suddenly, a guttural snarl pierces the air, or perhaps you catch a flash of movement in the undergrowth. Your horse shies violently, nostrils flaring, its instincts screaming danger. Before you can even draw your weapon, a pack of wolves might emerge, their eyes gleaming in the dim light, their lean bodies radiating hunger. These aren't the cuddly wolves from fairy tales. These are apex predators, desperate for a meal, and you and your horse look mighty appetizing. You might try yelling, waving your arms, making yourself appear larger, but if they're truly famished, they won't be easily deterred. It's a terrifying dance of intimidation and desperation, hoping they decide you're not worth the effort. Even more formidable is the bear. While often solitary, a mother bear with cubs, or a hungry male, could be incredibly aggressive. Imagine turning a bend in the trail and coming face to face with a hulking mass of fur and claws. Your heart would leap into your throat, and any thoughts of delivering that urgent message would be momentarily replaced by the primal urge to simply not be mauled. You'd probably try to look as non-threatening as possible, backing away slowly, hoping it sees you as less of a threat and more of a passing inconvenience. Just me, Sir Bear, not a tasty morsel, just a humble delivery person with very important, non-edible papers. You might stammer, hoping it understands human speech. A mainstream historical fact is that large predatory animals, particularly wolves, were far more common and widespread across medieval Europe than they are today. Deforestation and hunting over centuries drastically reduced their populations. For medieval travelers, encounters with wolves were a genuine concern, especially in winter when food was scarce and packs were bolder. Royal edicts and local bounties often targeted these animals to protect livestock and travelers. And here's a quirky tidbit. There are scattered accounts, some possibly exaggerated, of medieval travelers carrying specific types of animal fat or herbs, believing they could ward off certain beasts. Whether this was genuine folk wisdom or simply superstitious mumbo-jumbo, it speaks to the very real fear these animals inspired. Imagine spreading bear grease on your cloak to deter bears. It sounds counterintuitive, right? Historians still argue whether such practices offered any real protection or were merely psychological comforts in a dangerous world. You'd probably just rely on your trusty, and hopefully sharp, dagger if it came down to it. Even seemingly less dangerous animals could pose a threat. A startled deer could bolt into your path, sending your horse sprawling. A wild boar, renowned for its ferocity and razor-sharp tusks, could ambush you from dense thickets, capable of disemboweling a horse or rider with terrifying speed. You're constantly scanning the surroundings, not just for human threats, but for the glint of an animal's eye, the snap of a twig that's too heavy for a squirrel. You continue your journey, your senses on high alert. The silence of the forest is no longer peaceful. It's pregnant with the possibility of lurking danger. Every shadow seems to coalesce into the shape of a beast. Every rustle of leaves sounds like approaching paws. You grip the reins tighter, your knuckles white, and urge your horse to pick up the pace, eager to leave the deepest woods behind you. You might even break into a sweat despite the cold, a testament to the adrenaline pumping through your veins. The challenges just keep piling up, and you're only a few days into what could be a week-long, or even month-long, mission. You've faced down the wild, both human and animal, but there's an invisible enemy, far more insidious, lurking in every crowded inn, every muddy village, every breath of dust-laden air, disease. In medieval times, a scratch could fester into a life-threatening infection. A common cold could swiftly descend into pneumonia, and the bubonic plague, well, that was an entirely different kind of terror. Your greatest fear might not be a bandit's blade, but a cough that won't go away, or a sudden fever that leaves you shivering uncontrollably. Imagine arriving at a bustling market town, a beacon of civilization after days of solitary travel. You ride through narrow, winding streets, past open sewers and refuse piled high. The air is thick with the mingled smells of sweat, wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and animal waste. You see people with weeping sores, others coughing violently into rags, their eyes glazed with fever. You try to hold your breath, to avoid contact, but it's like trying to dodge raindrops in a downpour. Every handshake, every shared meal, every night spent in a crowded, flea-ridden common room is a roll of the dice with your very survival. A seemingly minor cut from a thorny bush, an insect bite, or even a blister from ill-fitting boots could become a death sentence. Without antibiotics, or even basic understanding of germ theory, infections spread rapidly. That small red line around a wound, signaling cellulitis, would quickly turn into a raging fever, delirium, and often, without intervention, an agonizing death. You carry no sterile bandages, no antiseptic ointments, just a few dubious herbal remedies passed down through generations, which you're more likely to use as good luck charms than actual medicine. Just rub some willow bark on it. You might hear, knowing full well it's a desperate gamble. Then there's the specter of the plague. While not always active, its memory and its periodic resurgence cast a long, dark shadow over medieval life. You hear whispers from terrified villagers of whole families wiped out, of towns becoming ghost towns. Every swollen lymph node, every unexplained ache, sends a jolt of panic through you. You avoid places where the black sickness is rumored to have struck, but you can't truly escape it. The fleas that carry the disease infest everything: clothing, straw beds, rats that scurry unseen in every building. It's a silent, invisible assassin that preys on the unsuspecting. A mainstream historical fact is that life expectancy in medieval Europe was remarkably low, often in the range of 30 to 40 years, with infant and child mortality rates being incredibly high. Beyond childbirth, infectious diseases were the primary killers, far more so than warfare or accidents. Dysentery, influenza, smallpox, and tuberculosis were constant threats, and even a robust individual could be felled by what we now consider a minor illness. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval medical practitioners, or physicians, believed that diseases were caused by imbalances in the body's four humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. They would prescribe bizarre remedies, like bloodletting, draining blood from a patient, or purging, inducing vomiting or diarrhea, to restore balance. Imagine feeling terrible and having someone offer to drain even more of your blood. Historians still argue whether these humoral theories had any accidental benefit or if they simply prolonged suffering, but they were the accepted medical wisdom of the time. You, a humble messenger, would probably just pray and hope for the best. You try to stay clean as much as possible, though the concept of daily bathing is a luxury reserved for the very wealthy, and even then, not for cleanliness as we understand it. You wash your hands in cold, often murky, water when you can, but mostly you just try to avoid the sick, to keep your distance, to be constantly aware of what you touch. You might carry a small pouch of strong-smelling herbs, believing they ward off bad air or miasma, which was a common medieval theory for the spread of disease. It probably doesn't help much against a virulent bacteria, but it makes you feel a little safer. As you ride out of a village, leaving behind the sights and smells of human habitation, a wave of relief washes over you. Yet, you also feel a familiar scratch in your throat, a slight ache in your head. You try to dismiss it as fatigue, but a nagging fear begins to settle in your stomach. The journey is long, the wilderness vast, but sometimes the greatest danger comes from within, or from the microscopic enemies you can't even see. You pull your cloak tighter, not just against the cold, but against the unseen threats that cling to the very air you breathe. You might think that once you've dodged bandits, escaped wolves, and somehow avoided a fatal medieval sniffle, your job is simply to deliver the parchment. Oh, how naive. The greatest danger you face might not be on the road, but within the message itself, or rather, the deadly currents of political intrigue and betrayal that swirl around it. Your dispatch is a live wire, and simply touching it could deliver a fatal shock. Imagine arriving at a rival lord's castle, the very air thick with suspicion. You're escorted through grim, stone corridors, past guards whose eyes follow your every movement. You present your message, perhaps a proposal for an alliance, or a demand for tribute, or even a declaration of war. But what if the message itself is a trap? What if your own lord, playing a dangerous game, intends for this message to provoke a conflict, and you are merely the unsuspecting pawn in his grand scheme? You, the delivery boy, could unknowingly be carrying your own death warrant. The contents of these high-stakes letters were rarely trivial. They could involve secret treaties, demands for surrender, coded instructions for espionage, or even thinly veiled threats. If a rival faction, or even a disgruntled noble within your own court, suspected the nature of your mission, you immediately became a target. They wouldn't care about your personal safety. They'd want to intercept the message, twist its meaning, or simply ensure it never reached its intended recipient. You could be waylaid not by common thieves, but by professional spies, ruthless agents who would use any means necessary to get their hands on that parchment. A mainstream historical fact is that espionage and political maneuvering were central to medieval power dynamics. Rulers constantly sought to undermine rivals, secure alliances, and gather intelligence. Messengers, as direct conduits of information, were inherently valuable assets to be protected or intercepted. The very act of sending a messenger was often a political statement in itself, sometimes testing the waters, sometimes delivering an ultimatum. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval courts employed message checkers or scribes specifically tasked with scrutinizing incoming dispatches for hidden meanings, coded language, or even subtle threats disguised as compliments. Imagine trying to deliver a note that basically says, "We like your hair, but we're going to burn your crops next Tuesday," and having someone trying to decipher it on the spot. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of such counterintelligence measures was due to genuine skill or simply a pervasive paranoia among medieval rulers. You're just hoping your message doesn't have a secret riddle that ends with your head on a pike. Consider the possibility of treachery from within. Perhaps someone at your own court, wishing to sabotage your lord, informs his enemies of your route or the nature of your message. You could be ambushed not by strangers, but by people who know your face, who know your habits. You have to be constantly vigilant, trusting no one too easily. An innkeeper's friendly smile could hide a sinister motive. A fellow traveler's camaraderie could be a ploy to gain your trust and then steal your dispatch in the dead of night. You present the message. Watch the recipient's face carefully for any flicker of emotion that might betray their true intentions. You deliver your lord's words, perhaps adding a few pleasantries or a bit of diplomatic flattery, trying to gauge the mood. Then, you wait for their reply, which you will carry back, once again becoming a walking parcel of volatile information. The air in these castles feels heavy, not with the smell of wood smoke, but with unspoken threats and hidden agendas. Every smile is a potential mask, every polite gesture a possible feint. As you ride away from the fortress, clutching the return message, you can't help but feel a chill that has nothing to do with the weather. You've successfully navigated one political minefield, but there will be more. The content of your messages, the very words you carry, are powerful, more so than any sword or shield. And in a world where power is everything, you, the humble messenger, are caught directly in the crossfire. You adjust your satchel, feeling the weight of the new parchment, and try to shake off the unsettling feeling that you've just been a pawn in a game you barely understand. You now understand, keenly, that your body is merely a vessel, your horse a mode of transport. The true cargo, the most vulnerable and dangerous item you possess, is the message itself. It's not just ink on parchment. It's power, it's destiny, it's sometimes a death sentence, and its weight, though intangible, presses down on you with immense gravity. You carry secrets that could ignite wars, broker peace, or condemn innocent lives. Consider the meticulous care with which these messages were often prepared. They weren't scrawled on scrap paper. Many important dispatches were written on high-quality parchment, perhaps even vellum, prepared by skilled scribes in elegant, often difficult to forge, scripts. The language used was frequently formal, sometimes even deliberately ambiguous or coded, especially if the message was highly sensitive. Then there was the seal, a blob of wax impressed with the sender's unique signet ring. This seal was crucial. An unbroken seal confirmed authenticity. A broken one meant the message had been tampered with, a discovery that would spell immediate trouble for you. You would handle that wax seal like it was made of fragile glass, constantly checking it, feeling its integrity through the leather of your satchel. The thought of it cracking or being counterfeited would send a cold dread through you. The sheer value of the information you carry makes you a target. Imagine a message detailing the troop movements of an invading army, or the exact location of a hidden treasure, or even the date of a planned rebellion. Intercepting such a message could mean victory or defeat in a battle, immense wealth, or the crushing of a nascent uprising. Your very presence, a lone rider hurrying along, signals that something important is afoot, drawing unwanted attention from anyone with a suspicious mind and a desire for advantage. You are a walking, breathing intelligence asset, whether you like it or not. A mainstream historical fact is that the integrity of the royal or lordly seal was paramount in medieval communication. A broken or tampered seal immediately raised suspicions of espionage or treason. Forged seals were a serious crime, punishable by horrific means, as they could plunge entire regions into chaos through misinformation. Messengers were often trained to verify seals and report any anomalies immediately upon delivery. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval lords employed cipher scribes, who specialized in creating complex codes and ciphers for their most secret communications. These weren't just simple letter substitutions. They could be intricate systems involving specific symbols, or even the use of invisible ink made from lemon juice or onion sap, revealed by heat. Imagine delivering a blank piece of parchment, knowing that its secrets only become visible when held over a candle flame. A trick that might literally burn your fingers if you're not careful. Historians still argue whether the complexity of these medieval codes was truly secure or if they were often broken by determined adversaries. You, the messenger, likely wouldn't even know the content, just that it was incredibly important. The burden of secrecy weighs heavily on you. You're instructed to speak to no one about your mission, to reveal nothing of your destination or the message's content. Every casual question from an innkeeper, every friendly inquiry from a fellow traveler, is met with evasive answers. You become a master of the non-committal grunt, the vague reply, the quick change of subject. You cultivate an air of being uninteresting, unremarkable, hoping to blend into the background and avoid drawing undue attention to your precious cargo. It's a constant performance, a silent plea to be overlooked. You finally arrive, the journey's strain etched on your face, your muscles aching, but the message is intact, the seal unbroken. You hand it over, the parchment cool and smooth against your calloused fingers. Only then, when the responsibility passes from your weary hands to the recipients, can you truly breathe. The relief is palpable, a sudden lightness in your chest. You've done it. You've carried the weight of power, of information, across a dangerous land. But even as you rest, awaiting the return dispatch, you know that the same perils will greet you on the journey back. The message delivered is just half the task. The return journey, with a new and equally vital message, awaits. So, you've survived the elements, the brigands, the beasts, and the subtle dance of courtly deceit. But how? Precisely, did you manage to get from point A to point B in a world utterly devoid of paved roads, rest stops, or even a decent cup of coffee? This brings us to the grinding reality of logistics: horses, supplies, and shelter. Your survival wasn't just about bravery. It was about meticulous, or sometimes desperate, planning for the practicalities of medieval travel. First, your horse. This isn't just a mode of transport, it's your lifeline. You wouldn't be riding some delicate warhorse designed for a knight's charge. You'd likely have a hardy, sturdy palfrey or a small rouncey, bred for endurance over speed, capable of carrying both you and your modest pack over rough terrain. You're responsible for its well-being as much as your own. You feed it, water it, check its hooves for stones, and inspect its tack for wear. A lame horse miles from anywhere means you're walking, and walking means you're slower, more vulnerable, and far less likely to deliver your message on time, if at all. And let's be honest, trying to explain to your lord why you arrived late and on foot because Gerald had a stone in his hoof isn't going to cut it. Then there are supplies. You carry a small pouch of oats for your horse, a few hard biscuits or dried meat for yourself, perhaps a bit of cheese, and a water skin that always seems to be emptying faster than you'd like. You have a spare set of worn clothes, a flint and steel for fire, and maybe a small cooking pot if you're lucky. Every ounce counts. You can't carry much, so every item must serve multiple purposes. Your cloak, for instance, is not just for warmth. It's also your blanket, your makeshift shelter, and occasionally, if you're really desperate, a way to signal across a valley. And shelter? That's where things get really interesting. If you're fortunate, your route takes you past a monastery, a friendly keep, or a bustling inn where you can pay for a bed and a hot meal. These are havens, offering temporary respite from the dangers of the road, and a chance to truly rest. You'd share the common room with merchants, pilgrims, and other travelers, perhaps swapping stories of the road, often exaggerated for dramatic effect, of course. But often, luck isn't on your side. You might find yourself sleeping rough under the vast, indifferent canopy of the stars. You'd seek out a sheltered spot, a stand of dense trees, a rocky overhang, or even a hidden cave to protect yourself from the wind and rain. You'd build a small, smoky fire to deter wild animals and cook your meager rations. The ground is hard, the air is cold, and every rustle in the darkness sets your teeth on edge. Sleeping with one eye open is less a figure of speech and more a survival strategy. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval inns and hospices, often run by monastic orders, were crucial stopping points for travelers, especially those on long journeys. They provided not only food and lodging, but also a degree of safety and community, acting as vital nodes in the rudimentary travel networks of the time. However, their quality varied immensely, from relatively comfortable establishments to squalid, dangerous hovels. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval travelers carried small, tightly packed traveling kits that included things like sewing needles, wax tablets for notes, reusable, and even small folding spoons. Imagine carefully packing your tiny medieval survival kit, probably more about mending a torn tunic than fending off a dragon. Historians still argue whether the average messenger could afford such luxuries or if they simply made do with what they had on their backs. You're probably closer to the latter, making your own repairs with whatever string or leather scraps you can scrounge. The constant need for resources means you always have to be thinking ahead. Do you have enough feed for your horse until the next village? Is your water skin full? Is that rain cloud going to force you to seek shelter early? Every decision, no matter how small, has consequences that could impact your mission or your life. You might joke to yourself, I'm basically a medieval Uber Eats driver, but with way more wolf encounters and zero customer service. It's a lonely, demanding existence, powered by resilience and the occasional, much-needed, warm hearth. You've managed the practicalities of travel, but now you plunge into another layer of complexity, navigating foreign lands. This isn't just about different landscapes. It's about encountering people who speak a different tongue, adhere to different customs, and may view you, a stranger, with anything from suspicion to outright hostility. Your ability to communicate, or at least navigate the lack thereof, becomes critical. Imagine crossing a linguistic border. One day you're hearing dialects of Middle English. The next, you're in a region where a form of Old French or a Germanic language predominates. Suddenly, asking for directions, inquiring about an inn, or even just attempting to buy food becomes an exercise in elaborate charades and frantic pointing. You might know a few scattered words, a rudimentary hello or thank you, but anything beyond that is a fog of incomprehension. This isn't just inconvenient, it's dangerous. Misunderstanding a warning or failing to understand a local custom could inadvertently lead you into trouble with local authorities or suspicious villagers. You try to mimic gestures, hoping your intent is clear, often feeling like a performing monkey. Food, horse, bed, good, bad? You might pantomime, hoping to convey the basics. Then there are the cultural misunderstandings. Customs about hospitality, social hierarchy, even what constitutes polite behavior, could vary wildly from one region to another. What's perfectly acceptable in your home duchy might be a grave insult in the next valley. Perhaps in one area, it's customary to offer a gift to the lord of the land for passage, while in another, such an act could be seen as an attempt to bribe. You walk a tightrope of etiquette, constantly observing, trying to adapt on the fly, hoping not to offend inadvertently. The stakes are high. A misunderstanding could escalate into an argument, or worse, a violent confrontation that you, a lone messenger, are ill-equipped to handle. You might carry a small, official-looking document, perhaps written in Latin, the lingua franca of the educated elite, stating your purpose and your lord's authority. But even this is no guarantee. The local reeve might not be literate, or might simply choose to ignore it, seeing you as an outsider to be exploited or dismissed. You rely heavily on the universal language of coin. A few silver pennies can often smooth over a lot of linguistic and cultural friction, opening doors that would otherwise remain stubbornly shut. Money talks, you might sigh, even in the medieval age. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval Europe was a patchwork of diverse languages, dialects, and local customs, even within what we now consider single countries. Standardization of language and law was a gradual process over centuries. This linguistic and cultural fragmentation made long-distance travel and communication incredibly challenging for ordinary people, unlike the more unified Roman Empire that preceded it. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval travelers carried small, illustrated phrase books or visual aids that depicted common objects or actions, acting as a kind of rudimentary pictorial dictionary. Imagine pulling out a scroll with a drawing of a horse and a bed, desperately trying to convey stable for my horse and a place to sleep for me. Historians still argue whether these visual aids were genuinely helpful or if they often led to more confusion than clarity. You probably wish you had one, rather than just having to point frantically at your rumbling stomach. The sense of isolation can be profound. Even when surrounded by people, the inability to truly communicate, to share a common understanding, creates a barrier. You feel like an alien, constantly on guard, constantly aware of your status as an outsider. This psychological burden adds to the physical exhaustion of the journey. You're not just carrying a message, you're carrying the weight of being perpetually out of place. As you navigate another winding road, passing through yet another village where the language sounds like a melodic gibberish, you feel a deep longing for home, for familiar faces and familiar tongues. You clutch the reins tighter, focusing on the path ahead, reminding yourself of the urgency of your mission. You have to push through the confusion, through the strangeness, because your message, whatever its content, demands to be understood, even if you yourself are not. Just when you thought you had a handle on the dangers of the road and the complexities of human interaction, you realize that your mission isn't just about delivering a message. It's about safeguarding information in a world rife with spycraft and counterintelligence. Your journey isn't a simple postal route. It's a covert operation where opposing factions actively seek to intercept, corrupt, or even forge the very dispatches you carry. Imagine the subtle signs: a stranger in the inn who seems overly interested in your destination, a seemingly innocent question about your lord's health, or perhaps a sudden, unexpected detour forced upon you by armed men who claim to be local guards, but whose uniforms you don't recognize. These aren't random encounters. They are calculated attempts to get at your message. Every shadow might conceal an agent, every friendly face a potential informant. You become inherently suspicious of everyone and everything. You might develop a nervous habit of glancing over your shoulder or checking your satchel one too many times. Rival lords, ambitious barons, and even foreign powers would employ their own networks of spies and informants. Their goals could vary: to simply learn the contents of your message, to replace it with a forged one that benefits their interests, or even to eliminate you and ensure the message never reaches its destination. Think of it as a medieval game of telephone, but with incredibly high stakes, where misheard words could mean war and deliberate interference could destabilize a kingdom. Your life depends on your ability to recognize a trap, to discern truth from deception, and to protect your vital cargo at all costs. A mainstream historical fact is that intelligence gathering and counter-espionage were sophisticated, if often brutal, aspects of medieval warfare and diplomacy. Rulers would employ agents, often disguised as merchants, pilgrims, or even monks, to infiltrate enemy courts and gather information. Methods like intercepting messengers, bribing officials, and deciphering codes were actively practiced. And here's a quirky tidbit. There are accounts of medieval spies using highly elaborate methods to hide messages, like engraving them on thin lead sheets that could be rolled up and swallowed, or sewing them into the soles of shoes. Remember that callback to the secret pockets in Section 1. Imagine the agony of trying to pass a lead scroll after being captured. Historians still argue whether such extreme measures were truly common or if they were the stuff of dramatic ballads and exaggerated tales, but the very existence of such ideas speaks to the lengths people would go to for secrecy. You probably hope your current dispatch isn't destined for your digestive system. The most dangerous scenario is often when the interception isn't obvious. A clever spy wouldn't necessarily jump you in the woods. They might try to gain your trust, ply you with ale at an inn, and subtly encourage you to reveal details of your mission. Or perhaps they'd swap your original message for a cleverly forged one, expertly replicating your lord's hand and seal. You wouldn't know until it was too late, and the repercussions would fall squarely on your shoulders. You'd be accused of negligence, or worse, treason. But I swear, my lord, the seal was intact. You'd plead to no avail. You learn to be cunning. You might take circuitous routes, vary your stopping points, or even spread false rumors about your destination. You sleep with your satchel strapped to your body, your dagger loose in its sheath. Every new face is scrutinized, Every seemingly casual conversation weighed for ulterior motives. You develop a kind of internal alarm, a sixth sense for when something isn't quite right. It's an exhausting mental burden, the constant paranoia, but it's what keeps you alive and your message safe. You might even crack a nervous joke to yourself. I'm basically the original Mission Impossible agent, but without the cool gadgets and with significantly more mud. As you ride, you see a small group of riders ahead, seemingly engaged in conversation. Your instincts immediately kick in. Are they truly just travelers, or are they waiting? You subtly change your pace, perhaps even consider taking a hidden path, even if it adds miles to your journey. In this deadly chess match of information, you are the knight, moving across the board, knowing that every square could be a trap. Your vigilance is your only shield against the unseen forces that conspire against your mission. After navigating the murky waters of spycraft and the constant threat of interception, you realize that your personal standing, your very public image, is another crucial factor in this dangerous game. Your life and the success of your mission often hinges on the messenger's reputation. Are you known as reliable, trustworthy, utterly incorruptible? Or are you seen as a potential weak link, someone who can be swayed, bribed, or intimidated? Your reputation precedes you, or at least the reputation of your Lord's messengers as a whole. If your Lord is known for ruthlessly punishing failure, his messengers might be seen as highly motivated and therefore less likely to deviate from their mission. If, however, he's known for leniency, or if there have been past instances of messengers failing or being compromised, you immediately become a softer target. You are, in essence, a walking advertisement for your employer's perceived strength and control. Every interaction you have contributes to this reputation. How you conduct yourself at an inn, how you haggle for supplies, how you react to a challenge, all of these small moments accumulate. If you are seen as easily flustered, boastful, or careless with your words, you become a prime candidate for those looking to exploit weakness. Conversely, if you carry yourself with quiet dignity, a focused demeanor, and an air of quiet determination, you project an image of unyielding resolve, making you a less appealing target for those seeking to interfere with your mission. It's a subtle form of psychological warfare, played out in every fleeting encounter. A mainstream historical fact is that the concept of diplomatic immunity or safe conduct for messengers was recognized, albeit imperfectly, in medieval Europe. A herald, easily identifiable by his tabard emblazoned with his lord's arms, was generally afforded protection. However, a less official messenger, like yourself, often disguised or simply unadorned, relied more on stealth, personal cunning, and indeed, a fearsome reputation to ensure safe passage. The line between a legitimate envoy and a common vagabond was often blurry to hostile eyes. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some very high-ranking medieval messengers, particularly heralds, would carry a special staff or caduceus, sometimes even adorned with symbolic animals, as a physical embodiment of their inviolability and authority. Imagine trying to argue with a bandit that your stick makes you untouchable. Historians still argue whether these symbols were truly effective deterrents against desperate criminals, or if they merely served to identify messengers as particularly valuable targets. You probably just polished your boots and tried to look as unthreateningly competent as possible. The constant testing of your trustworthiness isn't just external. You might face internal struggles. Imagine being offered a hefty bribe by a rival lord to lose a message or to deliver a falsified one. The temptation, especially if you're cold, hungry, and exhausted, could be immense. Your loyalty is constantly being weighed against personal gain or the promise of an easier life. This is where your personal code, your honor, or simply your fear of your own lord's wrath comes into play. You might joke to yourself, well, at least I won't have to explain this particular detour to the boss, as you firmly decline, even if your stomach is rumbling louder than a siege engine. The messenger's job wasn't just about delivering the message. It was about embodying the integrity and power of the sender. Every successful, untampered delivery reinforced your lord's reputation and, by extension, your own. Conversely, every failure, every instance of compromise, would reflect poorly on both. You are a living extension of your master's will, and your conduct directly impacts his standing in the intricate web of medieval politics. As you approach a new town, you straighten your shoulders, adjust your cloak, and try to project an aura of quiet confidence. You know that eyes are watching, judging, assessing. You might be just a messenger, but in this dangerous world, your reputation for reliability is as crucial as the sword at your side. It's a silent battle of perception, one you must win every single day to ensure that your message and you arrive safely. The trust placed in you is heavy, almost as heavy as the message itself. You've carefully cultivated your reputation, navigated the treacherous political currents, and held your nerve against threats both human and wild. But for all your efforts and resilience, the stark reality is this: punishment for failure was a very real, and often terrifying, consequence of your dangerous job. Medieval lords were not known for their understanding or their leniency when it came to vital matters of state, especially when their interests were at stake. Imagine finally arriving back at your lord's castle, exhausted, perhaps even injured, but with the return message safely in hand. You expect praise, a warm meal, and perhaps a few days of much-needed rest. But what if, in your absence, events have unfolded that make your message irrelevant, or worse, damaging? What if a rival lord has already made a move your message was meant to prevent? Or what if, despite your best efforts, the wax seal on the return message was tampered with, even subtly, by a clever spy? The slightest deviation, the smallest perceived error, could be met with swift and brutal consequences. You might be accused of incompetence, negligence, or even outright treason. Medieval justice was often summary and rarely concerned itself with nuance or extenuating circumstances. Your explanations, your pleas of innocence, would likely fall on deaf ears. A lord's wrath was a fearsome thing, and you, a mere messenger, were a convenient scapegoat. A mainstream historical fact is that treason and betrayal were among the most severely punished crimes in medieval society, often resulting in gruesome executions designed to serve as public deterrents. While a messenger's failure might not always be equated with high treason, it could easily be perceived as such, especially if it caused significant loss or embarrassment to their lord. The concept of accountability in this era was less about understanding systemic failures and more about finding an individual to blame. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval lords were known to have test messages sent, seemingly important dispatches that were actually designed to gauge the loyalty and competence of their messengers. Imagine carrying a fake declaration of war, only to discover later that you were part of a cruel psychological experiment to see if you'd be tempted by bribes or abandon your post. Historians still argue whether such elaborate tests were widespread or merely the cunning tactics of particularly paranoid rulers, but the very thought would certainly keep you on your toes. You'd probably joke, "I'm starting to think my lord just enjoys watching me squirm." The forms of punishment could range from a public flogging, designed to humiliate and physically chastise you, to imprisonment in a dark, rat-infested dungeon. But the worst, the truly terrifying possibility, was death. For a significant failure, for a perceived act of disloyalty, or for simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong message, you could be hanged, beheaded, or worse. Your life, which you had so bravely risked on the road, could be snuffed out in a cold castle courtyard, not by bandits or beasts, but by the very lord you served. The fear of this ultimate failure, this potential wrath, is a powerful motivator. It's the reason you push through exhaustion, brave the storms, and resist temptation. It's the unspoken pressure that rides with you every mile. You know that merely arriving isn't enough. You must arrive successfully, with the message intact and your integrity unquestioned. You stand before your lord, delivering the return message. You feel the intense gaze, searching for any sign of deception or inadequacy. You recount your journey, carefully omitting the more harrowing details, focusing only on the successful navigation of obstacles. You watch his face, hoping for a nod of approval, a flicker of satisfaction. The moment stretches, agonizingly long, until finally, he dismisses you. You walk away, relief washing over you, a deep, shuddering breath escaping your lungs. You've survived the journey, and perhaps more importantly, you've survived the judgment. But the shadow of potential failure, and its grim consequences will forever cling to the memory of your travels. Despite the incessant dangers, the constant vigilance, and the looming threat of dire consequences, there were, thankfully, occasional moments of respite. These weren't grand vacations or luxurious stays, but small, precious pockets of safety and comfort that allowed you to physically and mentally recharge before plunging back into the perils of the road. These brief interludes were what kept you going, tiny oases in a vast, dangerous desert. Imagine pulling up to a bustling inn after days of sleeping rough, your body aching, your clothes stiff with dried mud. The warm glow of the firelight spills out into the dark street, a welcoming beacon. The sounds of laughter, the clatter of tankards, the rich smell of roasted meat and warm bread. It's a sensory feast after the stark solitude of the wilderness. You dismount, leading your horse to the stable where it can finally rest and feed. Then, you step inside, shedding your cloak, and feel the blessed warmth seep into your bones. This is a moment of pure, unadulterated relief. You find a spot by the hearth, perhaps joining a table with other travelers, a merchant weary from haggling, a jovial pilgrim returning from a shrine, or even a wandering minstrel with a lute. You share a simple, hot meal, perhaps a thick stew, some fresh bread, and a mug of surprisingly good ale. The conversation, though sometimes limited by language barriers, is a welcome balm. You hear stories, perhaps share a few of your own, carefully edited, of course, to avoid revealing too much about your true mission. It's a fleeting taste of normalcy, a reminder of the human connections that exist beyond the grim realities of your job. You might even crack a light joke, something like, finally a bed that isn't also my saddle. Luxury. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval inns and alehouses served as vital social hubs, as well as places of rest, particularly for travelers. They were places where news was exchanged, deals were struck, and weary travelers could find a temporary community. The innkeeper often played a crucial role, providing not just food and lodging, but also local information and a degree of security against external threats. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval inns offered chamber pots made of ceramic or wood in their private rooms, a small luxury that allowed guests to relieve themselves without having to brave the cold or the dangers of venturing outside at night. Imagine the sheer joy of not having to squat behind a bush in the freezing rain. Historians still argue whether the perceived cleanliness of these private amenities outweighed the collective hygiene issues of a common room. But for a tired messenger, it was a definite upgrade. You'd probably think, a toilet inside? What will they think of next? Heated stables. Beyond inns, a chance encounter with a friendly farmer who offers you a space by his hearth, a generous meal, and a corner in his barn for your horse could feel like a miracle. Or perhaps a brief stop at a small, isolated monastery, where the quiet solitude and the simple hospitality of the monks provide a different kind of peace. These moments, unexpected and often unearned, serve as vital psychological breaks from the relentless tension of your journey. They remind you that not everyone is a threat, that kindness still exists in the world. These moments of respite are brief. However, the morning always comes too soon. You wake feeling refreshed, but the urgency of your mission quickly resurfaces. You thank your hosts, perhaps leave a small coin or a blessing, and once again, you saddle your horse. As you ride away, leaving the warmth and camaraderie behind, you carry the memory of that comfort with you. It sustains you, fuels your determination, and reminds you of what you are working to return to, a brief flicker of hope in the vast, dangerous landscape. You've had your brief moments of peace, but they only underscore the constant need for survival skills, necessity's demands. Being a medieval messenger wasn't just about riding a horse and carrying a letter. It was about possessing a gritty, practical knowledge of how to stay alive in a world that seemed determined to do you in. You were a walking, talking encyclopedia of rudimentary bushcraft, basic first aid, and street smarts. Think about the sheer resourcefulness required. If your horse went lame, could you fashion a makeshift poultice from local herbs to soothe its injury? If your water skin ran dry, could you identify a safe water source, or at least a way to filter questionable water through layers of cloth? You weren't carrying a GPS or a wilderness survival guide. You relied on ingrained knowledge passed down, often through tough lessons learned on the road. You learned to read the sky for impending weather, to identify edible and non-edible plants, and to make a fire even in the dampest conditions. You might joke to yourself, well, at least I'm getting really good at starting fires with wet kindling. My nightly training certainly didn't cover that. Basic first aid was another crucial skill. A cut, a scrape, a twisted ankle. These could easily become life-threatening without immediate, albeit crude, attention. You knew how to clean a wound with whatever spirits or clean water you had, how to bind it with torn cloth, and how to set a basic splint if a bone was broken. You understood the importance of resting an injury, even when your mission screamed for speed. Ignoring a minor ailment could lead to a major catastrophe, leaving you stranded and vulnerable. You were your own doctor, paramedic, and wilderness guide, all rolled into one weary package. A mainstream historical fact is that self-sufficiency was a cornerstone of medieval life, particularly for those who traveled. With limited infrastructure and specialized services, individuals had to possess a wide range of practical skills to cope with common challenges. Survival often depended on one's ability to adapt and utilize available natural resources. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval travelers carried a small, often elaborately carved, wooden spoon and a flint steel, knowing that a hot meal could make all the difference, and being able to make fire was crucial for warmth and cooking. Imagine the pride in a perfectly boiled egg over a self-made campfire after a day of dodging brigands. Historians still argue whether the average person truly mastered these varied skills or if they often relied on the kindness of strangers. You, with your life on the line, probably learned them the hard way. Beyond physical survival, there were the social skills. You learned to assess people quickly, who was trustworthy, who was a potential threat, who could offer genuine help. You developed a keen eye for suspicious behavior and a nose for trouble. You learned the art of conversation, not just for information, but for distraction, for disarming potential threats, and for simply blending in. You knew when to speak and, more importantly, when to keep silent. This wasn't about being charming. It was about being observant and strategic. You also had to be a master of resource management. Every coin, every piece of hardtack, every strip of dried meat was carefully rationed. You couldn't just pop into a shop when you ran out. You learned to stretch your supplies, to make do with less, and to appreciate the smallest comforts when they came your way. It was a constant negotiation with scarcity, a testament to the grinding realities of medieval travel. As you navigate another tricky ford, or mend a torn seam in your cloak with needle and thread, you reflect on the multitude of skills you've acquired, not through formal training, but through sheer necessity. You are a testament to resilience, a living embodiment of the phrase, whatever it takes. Each challenge overcome, each problem solved in the harsh crucible of the road, adds another layer to your capabilities. You are more than just a messenger. You are a survivor, honed by the very dangers you continually face. You've traversed the perilous roads, endured the brutal elements, outwitted human malice, and mastered the art of survival. As your journey nears its end, and you consider the countless others who rode these paths before and after you, you begin to grasp the legacy of the messenger. These individuals, often unsung and largely forgotten by history, were the crucial conduits of connection, the unsung heroes who literally held the fabric of medieval society together. Without you, and countless others like you, communication over distance would have been virtually impossible. Empires couldn't have been governed, alliances couldn't have been forged, and rebellions couldn't have been coordinated or suppressed. You were the sinews of power, the silent, often invisible, thread that wove through the disparate kingdoms and duchies, enabling the powerful to exert their will and the common folk to sometimes receive news from afar. Your sacrifices, the risks you took daily, allowed for the very continuation of medieval governance and commerce. Think of the sheer human will required for this job. Days, weeks, sometimes months on the road, in constant danger, with meager comforts. The mental fortitude to push through exhaustion, fear, and loneliness is immense. You weren't a knight riding into glory, nor a monk seeking salvation. You were a pragmatist, a survivor, driven by duty, fear, and perhaps a small, flickering hope for a safe return. Every message delivered, every mile covered, was a testament to that unyielding human spirit. A mainstream historical fact is that the development of reliable messenger services, however rudimentary, was foundational to the growth of complex states and larger political entities in the medieval period. Without the ability to send and receive commands and intelligence, centralized governance beyond a very local level would have been impossible, leading to further fragmentation rather than consolidation of power. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval messenger services, particularly those associated with large trading guilds, would employ relay riders, where one messenger would carry a dispatch a certain distance, then hand it off to another fresh rider and horse, allowing for faster overall transit, much like a medieval pony express. Imagine the brief, intense handover, a nod, and then they're off again. Historians still argue whether this relay system was truly widespread or if it was reserved for only the most urgent and well-funded communications. You, the lone rider, probably just dreamed of such luxuries. Your contribution to the tapestry of medieval life, though often unrecorded in grand chronicles, was profound. You delivered the wedding invitations that united noble houses, the grim news of a plague that emptied towns, the joyous tidings of victory, and the somber decrees of defeat. You were the bearer of all human emotion, contained within a sealed parchment, carried across an unforgiving landscape. You facilitated the flow of knowledge, of trade, of law, and of power. As you finally dismount, perhaps for the last time for a while, at your lord's gate, you feel the familiar ache in your bones, the lingering tension in your shoulders. You've become adept at this life, almost a part of the wilderness itself. You hand over the final dispatch, your duty fulfilled. You are just one messenger, one thread in the vast, intricate network of medieval communication. But your journey, your silent battles, your enduring spirit were integral to how the medieval world functioned. You may be a small cog in a large machine, but without you, the machine simply wouldn't turn. The day fades, softening into a gentle twilight. The sounds of the castle, muted now, drift on the evening air. The tension, which has been your constant companion, begins to recede, like a tide pulling back from the shore. You find a quiet spot, perhaps by a window, and simply gaze out at the darkening sky. The stars begin to appear, tiny pinpricks of light in the vast expanse, indifferent to the dangers you've faced, yet ever present, just like the whispers of history that carried you through your journey. Your own breath deepens, slowing, each exhalation a release. The images of rocky passes, shadowy forests, and stern faces begin to blur, softening at the edges. Let them fade, let them drift. Your work is done, for now. The roads, the challenges, the fears, they can wait. For tonight, there is only the quiet, the stillness, and the promise of rest. Let your body relax, every muscle unwinding from the strain. The gentle hum of distant sounds, perhaps the rustle of leaves or the soft murmur of the castle, becomes a lullaby. Allow your mind to clear, letting go of the urgency, the vigilance, the weight of the messages. There's nothing more to do, nowhere more to go, tonight. Just peace, just quiet. You're safe now. Let sleep come, soft and deep, like a warm, comforting blanket.